it's a very good question. I think that technology today, we have an advantage in that it's easily available to everyone. Every student, let alone an art department, every student has their own computer, probably, cameras. They can shoot film on a digital camera. Everything is very easily available, and you can make pretty passable films or prints or whatever very easily. I think this is probably a revolution that has accelerated, but perhaps it began to really take off in the 60s with screen printing and portable cameras and so on, portable video, film and video cameras. I think, and also I think it sort of hastened the onset of postmodernism, being able to just put things together very quickly, make surprising juxtapositions, and make connections between things very quickly and interestingly. I think the downside of it is that perhaps that ease of being able to make things convincingly probably sometimes it shortcuts the act of thinking. The artist can do things so quickly, and it, in a way, is encouraged to do things very quickly, to produce things immediately, that the sort of slow cogitation of ideas and the development of a style and so on, I think that has been the loss. I think a disadvantage of technology is that it does give a look, a bit of film shot on a camera on a mobile phone has, everyone's look is pretty similar. Things printed out from Photoshop, particularly with the filters and so on, gives everything a similar look. Some people who use sort of incredibly complex software to make sort of 3D images and so on, it already has an aesthetic independent of the person who's making it. And I think that's a terrible, it's a very difficult challenge for the artist to use the software to give the thing their own look, their own take on it.
Yeah.
I think that style is not something which I suppose the postmodernists thought, which style is just something which you appropriate and put on like a coat, and take off like a coat and put on a different coat. It's something which is very deep to the artist, and I think some artists arrive at a style very early, and others take years and years and years to arrive at a style. But I think it's something very deep, fundamental to the practice, rather than a surface attribute.
And what was the influence of technology in your own work? Like, I have seen, I can sense the change of using a lot of black and white, and use that darkness and all of those sort of plain colors,
Yes.
non-color,
Yes.
and from that going to use like still very dramatic, but color,
Yes.
you know, like those
Yes.
blues and reds
Yes.
that are suggesting similar ideas, but
Yes.
in another way. Do you think maybe technology is involved, maybe the way that people use or start thinking about different materials, colors, like different things, because of technology, because of the new digital media, or
Yes.
is your work influenced by that, or?
Well, it's just an immediate thought is I've started to make digital films, and one thing I love is footage shot on a mobile phone. I don't know if you saw it, but the death of Gaddafi, which was shot on a mobile phone, the moment he was captured, and there was this strange flurry of images and noises and so on. You couldn't quite work out, but there was this fantastic immediacy and drama to it, which a camera on a tripod just can't, which couldn't hope to capture. And I love that roughness and the graininess that comes with bad digital cameras. And I've wanted to use that, and I in my own films. And it's rather similar with when I started to use colour in the etchings, using digital chine-collé, using images which I could just find from the newspaper, which were grainy and rough, and sometimes even creased. I love that immediacy that I couldn't have got before. When I started making the Brecht-influenced etchings, the rigmarole of trying to get a photographic image onto a plate was just so complicated. Photocopies then were very bad, and very difficult to get to transparency, very difficult to then get it onto a plate. It was just so difficult, and now it's very easy. And just finding an image in a newspaper this morning and being able to have it on a plate by lunchtime is just fantastic.
Yeah, it is true. And just carrying on talking about technology and advantages or disadvantages, I don't want to say that maybe that's good or bad or just like judging things so quickly. But I'm just wondering, because you mentioned about like filming from a mobile phone, and I was just thinking about having iPads, iPhones, you know, like all of those sort of sources now. What do you prefer the most now when you are reading a book? What do you use now? An actual book?
Yes.
What do you appreciate more, like having that like appreciation for flicking pages,
yes, yes.
or you just stick with the new iPad that makes things
Yes.
really easy, really light, simple, like?
Well, I've been completely seduced by Kindle. I bought my wife one, and I was not convinced at all, but I was completely seduced by it. On the other hand, I can't imagine something like poetry, or even perhaps a play. I just can't imagine reading on a Kindle. Just the tactility of turning a page, of the texture of the paper, the almost the smell of the paper, is all part of the experience, I think, for me. And I think the same probably applies to reading a play. It's just the turning over, the anticipation as you turn over a page. I just can't imagine enjoying it as much on Kindle or an iPad.
Interesting. Okay, Marcus, thank you so much for helping us with this. It's been really interesting, having the pleasure to meet you and talking to you about this. So thank you. Okay. That was great. Thank you. Would you like to ask some questions? Like, I don't know, you've arranged.
Well, yeah. In terms of filmmaking,
Yes.
Times are changing very fast, I guess, and it was very different how 20 years ago people made films, and also it was, on a way more difficult.
Yes.
Well, how could you think it has changed? Now, which advantage? Well, it's again something similar that she asked, but it's more focused on film, how it has changed.
Well, I know, from a personal point of view, I know I couldn't have made films 20 years ago. I suppose it would have been video, and I just couldn't have done it. the editing and so on, I couldn't have got what I want, I think. And so in that sense, digital, working on a computer, with some footage, some images, things that just found footage from television and so on, all of that I can just put together very quickly. And then the other thing that I find with making films now on digitally is that I couldn't have done either on video or on film, is treating it much more like a painting, overlaying images, deciding that shot is a second too long and changing it. On video it would have been very difficult to get that, to just constantly change your mind, to constantly work over and over the rhythm and the sort of emphasis of a piece of film that I can do now on the computer. I was very taken by Tacita Dean's sort of enthusiastic sort of endorsement of film stock at the Tate. I don't know if you've seen her film.
Yeah.
Seduced by Kindle. I bought my wife one, and I was not convinced at all, but I was completely seduced by it. On the other hand, I can't imagine something like poetry, or even perhaps a play. I just can't imagine reading on a Kindle. Just the tactility of turning a page, of the texture of the paper, the almost the smell of the paper, is all part of the experience, I think, for me. And I think the same probably applies to reading a play. It's just the turning over, the anticipation as you turn over a page. I just can't imagine enjoying it as much on Kindle or an iPad. From a personal point of view, I know that I couldn't have made films 20 years ago. I suppose it would have been video, and I just couldn't have done it. The editing and so on, I couldn't have got what I want, I think. And so in that sense, digital, working on a computer, with some footage, some images, things that just found footage from television and so on, all of that I can just put together very quickly. And then the other thing that I find with making films now on digitally is that I couldn't have done either on video or on film, is treating it much more like a painting, overlaying images, deciding that shot is a second too long and changing it. On video it would have been very difficult to get that, to just constantly change your mind, to constantly work over and over the rhythm and the sort of emphasis of a piece of film that I can do now on the computer.
From studying English,
Yes.
to do film theory,
Yes.
and then printmaking. So I would like you to tell me more about what links you found that made you to go from this point to the other one. And
Yes. Well, I did English initially because I was quite good at it. But as soon as I started studying it, I realised that actually I could do it. My real love was art, making things. And then when I left Cambridge to go to the Slade to do the film theory, I still felt slightly frustrated. I thought that there would be some filmmaking, and actually there was very little, or at least it was very difficult to make films. So I started going to the print room at the Slade, and I fell in love with etching. I finished my thesis on German Expressionism, but all the time I was still making prints, making etchings in the print room. And as soon as I finished the thesis, I then started another postgraduate in printmaking. But it was funny because when almost as soon as I started the printmaking, there were, at that time, there was a very, very strong student movement. There were a lot of cuts just coming into higher education, and we were persuaded by fellow students to give up art, to occupy the college. But not only that, but there was a sort of very fierce group of students who actually thought that art was irrelevant, that it was something which was meaningless, that art was just simply a word attributed to certain objects to give them value, and that value was simply a market value. There was no inherent value in the work of art, and so we should give it up. The only valuable practice actually was, as far as they were concerned, was photography. Photography with a text, which they believed gave some sort of insight into reality, in the truth about the world. They felt that photography was the only medium which could tell the truth about the world. And I was just completely, first of all, frustrated because I'd spent so long sort of on the periphery of art, wanting to actually get down to it, and then being told we should give it up and occupy the college. I just found it frustrating beyond words. But also I was frustrated by the theory, the thinking that these people had. I just thought they were wrong. And I was interested in not making political art, but the question of whether political art is possible at all, and if it is, how that should be. And I had become familiar with Bertolt Brecht, and his sort of attitude towards the work of art in terms of society and in terms of politics. And so that, so a very roundabout way of answering your question, to an extent that theory of Brecht came to help my work. Very dramatically I changed from doing rather very small, intense, almost grotesque little caricature etchings, which are sort of good fun, rather amusing. I had become frustrated with doing that, although a lot of people liked those very much, and they were horrified when I started doing a much more sort of rough, immediate sort of etching, influenced by Brecht, wanting to see whether one could use Brecht's theories about the work of art and society in etching. And that was a long in a way I sort of spent probably about 5 years trying to explore that. All sorts of problems came up, I think, and I don't think it's very successful work, but nevertheless it was something I just had to explore. I think it's a debate which I think has been relevant, perhaps relevant throughout the history of Western art. Of whether the artist has some sort of responsibility to the world, whether the artist has a responsibility to look through the studio window and reflect what's happening beyond the studio, or whether, and one might say someone like Matisse is an exemplar of this, the work of art is something which is independent of the world. It has its own set of rules, its own meanings which are self-contained, and the work of art should not feel obliged to reflect the world beyond the studio, but just simply become something inherently beautiful on its own terms.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very important debate, and some people, believe one thing passionately and others the other passionately.
And yeah.